What on earth is happening? As my nephew and I stand dumbfounded on the sandy beach, the cruiser carrying my husband callously sails away, leaving us stranded on this deserted island. We were here for a family trip, supposed to enjoy camping. I had planned to create some beautiful memories for my adorable nephew. Now, left to behold this unbelievable scene, I could only stand frozen and powerless. My name is Nancy. I am 37 years old and live with my husband, whom I have been married to for a few years now. We do not have any children yet. Before getting married, it was just my younger sister, Emily, and me. Our parents, who were my everything, passed away simultaneously in March, just as I was about to graduate from high school. They were killed in a sudden car accident. At that time, Emily was only a 14-year-old middle school student. I wanted to do whatever I could to send Emily to college, so I started working immediately after my high school graduation. Emily studied hard, making use of every available moment, and with the help of scholarships, she successfully graduated from college. Afterwards, Emily found a job and married a man she met in college. Drawing on her work experience, she and her husband started a business which turned out to be a great success. When Emily came to announce her engagement, she looked apologetic, saying, "I am getting married and becoming happy thanks to you, while you have not yet." But none of that mattered to me. I was just overjoyed to see my beloved sister finding someone she loved and intending to live a happy life with him. 2 years later, my nephew, named Scott, was born. Seeing Emily surrounded by her new family and smiling happily was all the satisfaction I needed. I met my current husband, David, a little while after Scott was born. We were introduced through a mutual friend. From the stories David told me when we started dating, I gathered that he did not have a good relationship with his parents. They did not support his wish to go to college, so he used student loans to attend and is still repaying them. Both David and I come from complicated family backgrounds and have struggled with money for a long time. I think these shared experiences were what brought us together. I accepted David's proposal without hesitation. Since most of his earnings go towards repaying his student loan, I am the one who contributes more to our household expenses. But I have no complaints about that. Rather, as two people who have faced hardships, we want to support each other and live our lives together. I have only met David's parents once during our pre-wedding introductions and haven't seen them since. I remember an awkward atmosphere hanging in the air at that meeting. Even though we cannot afford luxuries, I felt a modest sense of happiness in our life. But then, a shocking incident occurred. I received a sudden call from the police informing me that Emily and her husband were involved in a car accident. Sadly, Emily and her husband passed away, leaving only Scott behind. Shocked, I left work early and rushed to the hospital where their bodies were being kept. There, sitting alone on a bench in front of the mortuary, was Scott, Emily's only son. He was all by himself, not crying but looking anxious. Seeing Scott in that state, I couldn't help but hold him tightly. In that moment, I made a decision that I would not let this boy be alone and that I would do everything in my power to make him happy in place of his late parents. When I brought Scott home, my husband didn't bother to hide his displeasure. I had pleaded with David, who was cold towards Scott, many times to please stop behaving that way. Eventually, he seemed to have developed affection for his nephew, and one day, out of the blue, he agreed to live together. Scott is Nancy's beloved sister's child, and we need to make him happy. While I found it puzzling that David could so suddenly change his mind, I took advantage of his change of heart and proceeded with the adoption. Scott would often show me his smile and seemed to bond well with me, but with David, he always seemed a bit distant. David's initial attitude towards Scott was very cold, and above all, Scott had just lost his biological parents. Until Scott calmed down, I decided to let things happen naturally, without pushing him. Additionally, Emily and her husband had left a considerable amount of inheritance for Scott. However, I decided it would be best to let Scott decide what to do with the money when he gets older, and until then, I decided not to touch it. Without David knowing, I prepared a safety deposit box and stored all documents related to the bank book, checks, and inheritance. By the way, Scott would sometimes stare blankly into the distance. There were also times when he appeared to be listening to something while staring at nothing. I had some idea about this. Emily once said, Scott seems to be able to see and hear things we can't. However, at the time, I found it hard to believe and brushed it off. This went on for a few months. Then David suggested that we take a trip. He said he was thinking of going to a campground on an isolated island by cruiser where they have all the necessary facilities. I thought it sounded like fun, but I was worried about the cost. David reassured me, saying that a friend of his was supposed to go, but something came up, and he gave us a very cheap price. Seeing David so happy, I slowly warmed up to the idea. I thought it would be a great opportunity for Scott, and I hoped that cruising and camping would help improve his mood. Well, let's get ready then, David said cheerfully as he left the room. I noticed that Scott watched him go with a surprisingly cold gaze. Scott, what's wrong? I asked. Aunt Nancy, there's something I want to tell you, but we have to keep it a secret from Uncle David, Scott replied, showing me something that looked like a voice recorder. And the conversation that played from it left me stunned. On the day of the trip, the cruiser carrying us left the harbor early in the morning. When we arrived at the island, David was the first to disembark and helped Scott and me off the cruiser. Nancy, watch your step there. Oh, thank you. Scott, be careful not to trip, okay? Yeah. Seeing David in such a good mood, I was both bewildered and happy. After all, it was our first family trip together. I wanted to make many wonderful memories for Scott. David, I'll unload the camping gear from the boat. You two go ahead and find a good place to pitch the tent. Okay. Holding hands with Scott, I walked away from the ship. Once he saw us leave, David went back to the ship and began talking to the cruiser driver. And then, what? Unbelievably, my husband didn't disembark from the cruiser. Instead, he left Scott and me on the island, and the cruiser began to speed off into the open sea. In no time at all, the ship had disappeared from sight. What on earth is happening? I was completely at a loss for what was happening and mumbled these words to myself. Nancy, it's okay, Scott said. But Mom said someone would come soon. Mom? Emily? Emily said that? Scott nodded emphatically. It reminded me of something Emily once told me. Scott seems to have some kind of mysterious power. He can see auras of good and evil in people and things, and recently he seems to be able to predict the near future, albeit vaguely. Predictions about the near future, like a package will arrive soon, or someone will come around the next corner, are often vague but pertain to the near future. When Emily told me this, I didn't really believe her. Surely not, I thought. Yet in this situation, I clung to Scott's words. With a surge of hope from Scott's words, I decided to first protect myself from the heat of this midsummer day and moved to a shaded area where there was a breeze. I conserved energy by moving as little as possible. Luckily, we had a flask of tea in Scott's backpack, and we shared it. Scott, are you okay? You don't feel sick or anything, do you? I'm fine. What? Nancy, look! They're coming! In the direction Scott was pointing, I could see a small motorboat approaching. It seemed to be manned by 3 teenage boys. They looked extremely surprised to see us camping with only one bag. Of course they were. Apparently they were having fun fishing in their parents' motorboat and visited various fishing spots. Fortunately, the deserted island we were on was one of the spots they frequently visited. Of course, the island is a privately owned campsite and off-limits to anyone not involved. Thanks to their secret fishing game, our lives were saved. The boys let us ride in their motorboat, and Scott and I were able to return safely to the mainland. After saying goodbye to the boys, Scott pulled out a GPS from his backpack to show me. Is that a GPS? I didn't need to call for help because I was told someone would come soon. Emily really said that. I was confused by what was happening before me. The fact that I was abandoned by my husband Scott, who claimed to hear Emily's voice even though she was supposed to be gone. Scott's preparedness. As my mind was in a whirl, my phone suddenly rang. This number. Hello? As the story on the other end of the phone unfolded, my head, initially in turmoil, began to cool bit by bit. Yes, I understand. My body couldn't stop shaking with anger. I can't believe he would stoop so low. I absolutely won't forgive him. After what he's done to Scott and me. An eye for an eye? No, we'll give him triple what he gave us. After that, I made a call to certain people, explaining the situation. The next day. Phew, I'm beat. You're late, aren't you? Well, what, Nancy? How are you here? My husband returned home leisurely, unaware that we had beaten him to it. The call that had come in when Scott and I landed was a report from the detective agency I had hired before our trip. The day my husband invited us on the trip, the voice recorder that Scott had shared with me had captured my husband discussing financial matters with someone. Nancy, I feel like he is up to no good. I was surprised that Scott even had a voice recorder, but what my husband was discussing was even more shocking. With a bad premonition, I decided to look into our joint savings account, and there was barely anything left. My husband had withdrawn the money without my knowledge. Shocked, I wanted to confront my husband right away. But I suppressed that urge, thinking it was best to first get solid evidence, so I decided to hire a detective agency. It was during the cruise trip before this report arrived that Scott and I nearly faced danger. After receiving the report from the detective agency, I immediately contacted my husband's parents to explain and confirm the course of the incident and the contents of the report. Upon hearing my story, my in-laws said, "We'd like to be present when you talk to David," and immediately made their way over here. That's how we got to this point, and there was another man present whom I had contacted him. "Why are my parents here?" I asked. "So, you reported that Scott and I went missing, that we fell from the cruiser?" I said, "How thoughtful of you. But we didn't fall from the cruiser, you left us on the island." My husband was pale and drenched in cold sweat, trying to think of some excuse. In addition to this incident, it seemed like my in-laws had something they wanted to confirm with my husband. According to the report from the detective agency and my in-laws, my husband had not been repaying his student loans at all. The truth was that he had a massive debt from gambling. From gambling in his college days, he had asked his parents to cover the repayments on the condition of monthly payments. The reason he had been telling me he was estranged from his parents was entirely due to this debt, and he had cut off visits to his family so I wouldn't notice the delays in repayment. Moreover, for about the last year, those repayments had been delayed, and there was another reason for that. My husband was smitten with a certain club girl and was splurging on her as if money was water. Because of this, he was not only unable to make repayments to his family, but he also spent our savings. What the hell is going on? Will you explain it now? Surrounded from all sides and with no way out, my husband finally gave in and began to talk. She had a gangster boyfriend. Apparently, the girl and her gangster boyfriend had repeatedly demanded hush money to keep their affair secret from me and our parent company. In other words, he had been trapped in a scam, played like a sucker. At first, he was paying out of his own salary, then moved on to our savings. According to him, when he was running out of money and panicking, I happened to mention wanting to take care of Scott. Initially, he thought it would be impossible to take on another child when they were so strapped for cash. However, when he found out the child was the son of my sister and brother-in-law, who had been running a business, he thought he might be able to make use of their wealth. But no matter how much I searched, I couldn't find the passbook containing the inheritance. I thought if Scott, the supposed inheritor of the inheritance, and his guardian Nancy disappeared, the property would become mine. His selfish reasoning left both me and his parents flabbergasted. Despite this, David insisted that he was a victim. I was constantly extorted by gangsters. I'm a victim too, right? Right? Another person present at the scene quietly said to him, "Enough is enough." His quiet but powerful words filled with anger silenced David, who had been shouting until now. First of all, there's no way such selfish reasoning would work. And there's no reason why you, who has nothing to do with this, should say such things to me. This is Mr. Stevens, a lawyer? A lawyer. Mr. Stevens was a close friend of Emily's husband. Since Scott was born, Mr. Stevens seemed to have adored him very much. Even after Emily and her husband died in an accident, he seemed to be very concerned about what happened to Scott. And when it was decided that Scott would be taken in by me, it turned out that he had provided him with a GPS and a voice recorder. "Scott, we don't know what's gonna happen from here on out. "So I'll give you this," he said. "What is this?" Scott asked. "If you feel like something bad is about to happen, use this recorder to keep some evidence. The GPS here is set up so that if you press this button, it'll tell me your location on my phone." "I understand." "Scott, listen well. If anything happens, don't hesitate to call on me." It was thanks to Mr. Stevens that Scott was able to record suspicious conversations of my husband and have the means to call for help using the GPS, if necessary. This ended up saving not only Scott but me as well. Scott is very important to me. I will never forgive you for putting him in danger. My husband, unable to respond, just fell to his knees. Without any will to resist, my husband was taken away by the police officers that Mr. Stevens had called. Later, it turned out that the driver of the yacht was a gambling buddy of my husband's. He had apparently persuaded his friend that if the plan went well, they would make a lot of money and got him involved in this scheme. The man was also sentenced to heavy punishment for his involvement in this murder and several other crimes. As for the girl who triggered this whole commotion and her gangster boyfriend, they were already on the police radar as habitual con artists. My husband's arrest led to their arrests as well, Mr. Stevens told me later. After my husband was arrested, I immediately filed for divorce, and so I started living alone with Scott. Raising a boy was challenging, and I often felt lost. But with the help of those around me, I managed to make it work. As for Scott's mysterious powers that greatly helped solve this case, it seemed to gradually disappear as he grew up. He doesn't hear voices of invisible people or see auras anymore, Scott tells me with a smile. Although I feel a twinge of sadness about it, seeing Scott smiling happily brings me great contentment. Mr. Stevens, who adored Scott, seemed very worried at first about me managing the inheritance as Scott's guardian. "Aunt Nancy is fine," Scott assured him. "Really? Why do you say that?" I asked. "Because Mom said so. She said she would definitely protect me," Scott replied with a grin. It seems he took Scott's words to heart. Before long, Scott started to beg to go out and play with just the three of us. Now Scott watches with a happy, slightly mischievous face as Mr. Stevens, who is now completely warmed up to me, and I talk. Whenever I ask, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Scott would dodge the question with, "It's nothing." And at those times Mr. Stevens would invariably let out an awkward, strained laugh. After several such exchanges, one day Mr. Stevens proposed to me, mentioning the prospect of marriage. Shocked, I asked Scott, "Did you know this was gonna happen?" To which he replied with his usual evasive smile, "Who knows? You should forgive me for stealing some money." My husband's justification when he was taking money from my purse. However, when he was initially caught, he didn't say anything as severe. Instead, he sincerely apologized and paid me back. I ended up being lenient, but it was later revealed that he had also been stealing from our son. When I found out, I resolved to disclose his wrongdoings to our son and mother-in-law who lived with us. There's no need to be considerate any longer to a man who causes trouble not only to me, but also to our son. I've kept quiet so far, but the truth is that my husband... In a fit of anger, I exposed Greg's misconducts. My name is Mary Miller. I'm 46, working part-time and a housewife at home. I married Greg 20 years ago. He's a serious company employee, and I think he's a good husband. Now we're living as a family of 4, including our 17-year-old son Mark, and my mother-in-law, Mrs. Deborah. Lately Mark has been distant more often, perhaps because of his rebellious phase. But Mark is a kind boy at heart and is currently working hard, studying for college admission. I believe this rebellious phase will pass in time, so it's a matter of enduring until then. Mrs. Deborah recently lost her husband due to an illness. She originally lived with her husband, but after his death, we thought it would be hard for the elderly Mrs. Deborah to continue living alone, so she moved in with us. However, having lost her beloved husband, Mrs. Deborah has been feeling down for a while. She's usually mild-mannered and laughs a lot, so her current state was worrisome. I tried to be as gentle as I could with Mrs. Deborah in an attempt to alleviate her emotional burden. Despite these issues, we were a normal family living reasonably happy days. However, happiness proved to be a fragile thing, capable of collapsing without warning. One day I went shopping, and when I tried to pay, I realized 3 $10 bills were missing. I had withdrawn them from the ATM the previous day and had definitely put them in my purse. The purse was securely closed in my bag, and it was unlikely that the bills would slip out and fall on the road. Could it be that someone took them? A nasty suspicion crossed my mind, but there was no solid evidence. The loss was only $30, so I decided not to pursue it further and observed the situation. However, the next morning, more money was missing. This time $50 was gone. It was definitely in my purse when I checked last night. The purse had been in the house all night, and there were no signs of a thief. Unpleasant as the thought was, I could only assume someone in the family took it. I decided to consult Greg about it. When I explained the situation in detail, Greg, looking evasive, said, "Actually, I know who the culprit is. It's Mark. He was rummaging through your bag when he woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Maybe he thinks it's okay to take this much from his parents, because he's going through a rebellious phase." I couldn't believe it. No matter how rebellious, Mark wouldn't resort to stealing money. Greg's shifting gaze was also concerning. So I proposed this. Alright, I'll talk to Mark myself. I think he might be more willing to talk to me, since we don't spend much time together. Greg readily agreed to this. It wasn't that I believed what Greg said. Rather, his nervousness made me suspicious. I thought it might be best to clarify the perpetrator. I bought a small surveillance camera and installed it in an inconspicuous place. I positioned it so that it would capture my purse, which I left untouched for a day. Checking my wallet, another $50 is gone. I checked the recorded footage, and there was the culprit. It wasn't Mark. It was Greg. Making sure there was no one around, he didn't hesitate to take money from my wallet. Seeing this, I felt intense anger. Stealing money is bad enough, but trying to frame my son was something I couldn't forgive. When I confronted Greg with the evidence, he was flustered and stuttered. "No, that's not it." "I mean, what do you mean that's not it? It's clear as day that you're the one stealing. Why would you do such a thing?" Greg began to explain in resignation. "I have a gambling debt. I was desperate for money. I was completely thrown off. I had no idea that Greg was gambling or that he had a debt." "Is that true?" "Yeah, it's not a lie." Greg brought out some documents. They indicated that he was in debt for a total of $5,000. Oh no, I was at a loss for words. Greg began to desperately explain. "I thought you would be mad if I told the truth, so I blamed Mark. I'm sorry for lying and keeping my debt a secret. I have a plan to pay it back, and I'm slowly repaying it from my salary. I'll make sure Mark goes to college, and you won't have any trouble living." Greg apologized many times and repaid the money. Since he seemed genuinely remorseful, I decided to forgive him. "Alright, I'll trust you this one time. But if you do it again, I won't forgive you." I was stern in my warning, but I didn't want to worry Mark or Mrs. Deborah unnecessarily, so I decided to keep quiet for the time being. But as they say, trouble comes in threes. This was just the beginning of real hardships. A week after the debt was revealed, Greg kept his promise and stopped stealing money from my purse. But when Greg came home, he looked very gloomy and said my salary has been cut. According to Greg, his company was not doing well recently, and his salary had to be cut by almost $1,000. With a debt and Mark's college tuition to save up for, what are we supposed to do? I was at a loss. After thinking about it, I decided to take on more part-time work. I started working at a 24-hour fast food restaurant, from late at night until early morning. It would be physically tough, but the night shift paid more, so I decided to give it a try. Obviously, I had to tell Mark and Mrs. Deborah about this, so I called them into the living room. Then Mark said he had something serious to discuss, so I decided to listen to his story first. I thought it would be about his studies or college plans, but what he said was completely unexpected. For about a week, money has been disappearing from my piggy bank. Yesterday, I saw Dad opening my piggy bank. My piggy bank without my permission. When I asked him what he was doing, he dodged the question. It was suspicious. Hearing this, I was at a loss for words. Mrs. Deborah had a look of disbelief on her face. Could it be Greg had changed his target to Mark? The idea of a husband stealing money from his own son was unthinkable. But then again, Greg has a history of trying to pin his own guilt on Mark, and he's strapped for cash. At that moment, Mrs. Deborah said something shocking. When Greg was in high school, he once tried to steal a video game he had borrowed from a classmate. I thought it was okay because I scolded him severely. Come to think of it, things frequently disappeared when I was a member of my college club. Greg was also a member of that club. By this point, it was only natural to consider Greg as the culprit. For now, I decided to hold on to Mark's piggy bank. So you have something to say to us too, right? What's going on? Mark asked me, so I told them both. Actually, I have to take on a part-time job in the morning at night. Why? Do you and Greg not have enough money? Mrs. Deborah asked. I was not sure how much to say, but I decided to tell them everything. There's no need to tiptoe around a man who not only inconveniences me, but also our son. I've kept it from you too, but actually my husband. I confessed Greg's misdeeds, seething with anger. 2 weeks later, Mark, Mrs. Deborah and I intercepted Greg, who claimed to be going to work on his day off, and brought him to the living room. What's going on? I'm going to be late for work. Make it quick. I looked at Greg with a cold stare as he said that. You're lying about going to work on your day off, aren't you? You've really quit your job. Greg's face turned pale instantly. What are you talking about? There's no way I quit my job. How many lies do you have to tell to be satisfied? I called your company and asked them directly. There's no mistake. When I yelled at him like that, Greg froze, his body trembling. You supposedly resigned for personal reasons. But the truth is you were stealing money from your coworkers' wallets and quit because you were about to get caught, right? Greg stared in disbelief, seemingly shocked that I knew even this. I had called one of Greg's former colleagues who reluctantly told me. About 2 months ago, a female employee was making a fuss about money missing from her wallet. After that, similar incidents kept happening. Greg mentioned he had debts at a party, and he was always looking at people's wallets and bags. Plus, in his department, there were rumors that things always went missing. It was just pens and clips, and the loss was insignificant. There was no evidence of theft, so they've been handling it quietly. His colleague never claimed Greg was the culprit, but it seemed like he believed Greg was very likely involved. You're the one who did it, aren't you? When I sternly asked him that, Greg answered with a frightened expression. With a frightened nod, I answered yes. However, that was not the only secret that Greg had. I pulled out an envelope and took out a few photos. Greg immediately looked away when he saw them, but I shoved them in front of his face. The photos showed Greg and a beautiful woman holding hands and walking. This clearly looks like an affair, doesn't it? I hired a private investigator to look into it. Be prepared to pay child support. As I glared at Greg, he frantically started babbling about his affair. He claimed to have met her randomly on the street and fell in love with her before he knew it. She told him she truly loved him too. I was even angrier now, so I decided to deliver another blow to Greg. Do you know your mistress's real name, Greg? I asked. Of course it's Emily Davis, right? To Greg, who was wondering why I asked that, I revealed the truth. Sorry, that's a pseudonym. Her real name is Jessica Turner. She has a criminal record for fraud. No, that's a lie. There's no way Emily would commit fraud, Greg adamantly denied. But in response, I searched Jessica Turner on my smartphone and showed him an online article. In the article, Jessica Turner had been arrested for fraud, and there was a photo of her face. It was the same face as Greg's mistress. Well, are you ready to believe it now? Don't you think she got close to you just to swindle your money? I said with a disgusted tone. Greg murmured, no way, and seemed to collapse. Seeing Greg's face filled with despair, I felt a small sense of relief in my chest. This was his punishment for cheating. But even so, it was almost poetic that a liar like Greg would be approached by a fraudster. Birds of a feather flock together, as they say. I was angry, but at the same time, I was also flabbergasted. However, there was still something left that I wanted to say to Greg. I showed him a piece of paper. It was a divorce paper that I had asked a lawyer to prepare. I can't be married to a man like you anymore. You'd better prepare yourself for a divorce, I said. But then Greg pleaded, please forgive me. I have debts and I've lost my job. If you divorce me now, I'll be in financial trouble. I admit that I've stolen various things, but it's not a significant amount of money. I only intended to borrow it and I plan to return it. Besides, we're family. Can't you forgive me for stealing money? He chose another woman over me, and now he's asking for forgiveness. He claims he intended to return the money, but I doubt how much of that is true. I was about to yell at Greg, but then a loud voice interrupted us. Enough is enough, it was Mrs. Deborah. It's not about the amount of money or family. Stealing from others is wrong. How can you not understand that even as an adult? And to top it off, you cheated. I can no longer see you as my son. Please let me cut ties with you. Greg's face instantly looked like he was about to cry. You're my mother, right? Can't you defend me a little? He begged. I couldn't believe he had the audacity to ask for forgiveness after everything he had done. That I decided to give him a piece of my mind. When I told Mrs. Deborah about your debts and how you stole my money, she was unbelievably angry. It was Mrs. Deborah who suggested calling your employer and hiring a private investigator. As I explained why I had to take a part-time job, Mrs. Deborah yelled, "What? What is he thinking, causing trouble for his precious family?" There was absolutely no trace of the usually mild-mannered Mrs. Deborah. She was more angry than I had ever seen her before. We can't let this go. We have to take revenge. Greg might be hiding something else, so let's investigate thoroughly this time. She said this and quickly laid out a plan for revenge. It's true what they say, the kindest people are the scariest when they get angry. When I pointed this out, Greg must have realized that even his mother wouldn't help him. This time he clung to Mark. Hey Mark, you're a high schooler, but you wouldn't want to lose your dad, would you? Stand up for me. But Mark, his face bright red, glared at Greg. I don't need a dad who steals and cheats. How dare you betray Mom? Being abandoned by his son, Greg finally seemed to realize that he had no allies left. He was crying, but when Mrs. Deborah told him to apologize to Mary and Mark properly, with a stern voice, he was pressured by her intensity and kept apologizing. I'm really sorry. I've reflected on my actions. It was too late for apologies. I couldn't possibly forgive him. If you're truly remorseful, listen to my wish. Agree to the divorce immediately. If you have any objections, hire a lawyer. I thrust the divorce papers at him again, and finally, Greg seemed to accept our divorce. Afterwards, we reclaimed the money Greg stole and kicked him out of the house. We filed for divorce. Then, through our lawyer, we made a claim for child support. Perhaps finally sensing the gravity of the situation, he made a lump sum payment. After that, it seemed Greg was in serious financial trouble. Due to not only gambling, but also lavishing luxury items on his mistress, he had accumulated actual debt of about $10,000. He must have racked up an astronomical amount of debt, considering the amount he continued borrowing, but that's not my concern. Moreover, Greg was abandoned by his mistress. Probably she was just after his money. Greg seemed to want to sue her for fraud, but since he was the one who voluntarily lavished her, he gave up in the end. Furthermore, 2 months after the divorce, Greg was arrested for embezzling money from his company. I made sure to inform Greg's former company that he had been a habitual thief. We considered turning him into the police ourselves, but we decided to leave it to the people of the victimized company. Considering my husband has a habit of lying, there might still be things he's hiding. Probably because I warned them, the companies seemed to thoroughly investigate their finances. As a result, Greg's embezzlement was exposed. I wonder how much crime that man needs to commit to be satisfied. It was definitely the right decision to sever ties with him. If not careful, I might have been implicated in his crimes. With Greg, the breadwinner, gone, I managed to secure a full-time job through an acquaintance. I have enough income to support Mark and Mrs. Deborah. Mrs. Deborah is also working part-time. When I divorced Greg, Mrs. Deborah said, "I'm sorry my son has caused you so much trouble. I can't impose on you any longer, so I'll leave." However, living alone as a senior can be worrisome, and both Mark and I love Mrs. Deborah very much. Greg and I are completely different people. I consider you as part of my precious family, so please stay with us forever. I managed to convince her to stay. Mrs. Deborah seems to have regained her vitality by working part-time and living her new life. Recently, she's been smiling more. Mark, who was deeply shocked by the recent incident, also seems to be regaining his energy. Perhaps understanding our home situation, he even helps out with household chores. It seems like peaceful days are about to return to our home. I'm trying to forget about Greg and walk my own life path with a positive mindset. I want to keep working hard to support my family. I feel like a bright future is waiting for us. Let's break off our engagement. I'm marrying her instead. What? That's the way it is. Sorry about that. The one laughing triumphantly next to him is my half-sister. Several months have passed since that shocking event. Just as the wound from the broken engagement began to fade, and I started to move forward, I saw my sister again on my way home from work. Huh? Why are you here? I tried to hurry past without her noticing, but she said, I found you. I've been looking for you. She seemed angry, but I had no idea why I should be the one being scolded. If anything, I should be the one who's mad. What do you want? I've got nothing to say to you. What the hell is going on? You've been lying to me, haven't you? Huh? What on earth are you talking about? I'm a saleswoman and I just turned 30. A year ago I started dating a man named Michael, and he proposed to me a month ago. We were engaged, but that was called off today. As someone who wants to get married and have kids like me, having the engagement broken off just before turning 30 is nothing short of a disaster. After breaking up with Michael, I headed straight to my family home where my mother was waiting. Of course, the fact that my engagement was off, and the reason why was too cruel to bear alone, so I called my mom immediately. She quickly said, I'm at home right now, so come over. Where are you? Should I come and get you? Even though I was dumped by my fiancé, there were people who cared for me. Just feeling that lightened my heart a little. I told her I could get home myself, and with my mind blank, I got on the train and headed for my family home. When I arrived, my mother was waiting for me at the front door and said, Welcome home. And home, as I said that, the tears I had been holding back came pouring out like a waterfall. Without asking what had happened, my mother silently waited for my tears to calm down. Then, when my tears had subsided a bit, I started to tell my mother about what had happened that day. I was supposed to meet Michael today, but when I got to the meeting place, Becky was there too. What? It's not surprising that my mother was shocked. Becky is my half-sister. Although she's my half-sister, we can't exactly say we get along well. We've had a complicated relationship since forever. I had never introduced Michael to her, so I had no idea why Becky and Michael were together. But the unexpected pair had more shocking news. Harper, there's something I have to tell you today. I want to break off our engagement. What? Of course, I couldn't accept it right away. Things had been going well with Michael recently. We had even taken a short trip last week and discussed our wedding rings. There had been no signs that he was going to break up with me. Why? Can you tell me why? I had a bad feeling when I saw Becky next to him. That's because Becky has always tried to steal my boyfriends and friends in the past. But after growing up, none of this happened, and I honestly thought it wouldn't happen anymore. I wanted to believe so, but Michael's reply was, I've fallen in love with someone. I intend to marry her. That's what he said. And when I saw him looking at Becky so adoringly, I felt dizzy. Becky looked at me triumphantly and said, That's the way it is. Sorry about that. Michael may not know about my relationship with Becky. Even so, I couldn't believe this was a coincidence. I was certain that Becky had planned this to break off my engagement. But even knowing that, there's nothing I can do now. If Michael has fallen in love with Becky, no matter how much I try to convince him otherwise, it will just sound like I'm a sore loser. I should be angrier at having the person I promised to marry taken from me. Maybe I should be clinging more, saying I don't want to break up. But I couldn't do that. I felt that if I did, I would feel even more miserable. I understand. It's okay now. I said just that in a small voice and turned my back on them. Then I called my mom. My mom called, and that brings us to now. After hearing everything, my mom paused for a moment and then in a kind voice said, You must have been through a lot. Cry all you want until you feel okay. Yeah, thanks. I'm really grateful to have my mom. It's gonna be tough for a while, but I'll surely be able to think positively. That's when my mom shocked me with her words. But, it's a good thing. Even if you had married your fiancé, I don't think you would have been happy. That's what I believe. I was taken aback by her unexpected statement. What? What do you mean? Then my mom smiled softly and said, "Because he's a man who could easily discard a wonderful woman like you. Also, I don't think things will go well between the two of them. Happiness built on hurting others so ruthlessly is fragile." There's something else that's been on my mind. I don't have proof, so I can't say it now. But I'm sure you'll understand soon, Harper. Don't worry, you're gonna be happy. I was really curious about what my mom wanted to say, but I didn't have the energy to think deeply at the moment. Strangely, I could trust my mom's words. So that day I didn't pursue it any further and decided to go back to my own house because I had work the next day. On my way home, I was absent-mindedly thinking about the past. My parents divorced when I was 3 years old. My dad had an affair and left us. My mom has raised me by herself ever since, and the woman he had an affair with was Becky's mother. I have no intention of denying Becky's existence, but considering Becky is 2 years younger than me, it's easy to see how despicable my father's actions were. As an adult, I feel this more deeply. Even so, my father, as he is, seemed to care a bit about me. His daughter, he always sent me a gift for my birthday, and would take me out for meals a few times a year. When I was young and didn't even understand the meaning of the word affair, I purely loved my father who would come to see me. And my mom never said anything against that. I first met Becky when I was in 3rd grade. Normally I would dine with my dad, just the two of us, but this was the first time he brought along Becky. I was still a child back then, so I didn't care who Becky was or anything about her. I was just thrilled to be able to play with a girl slightly younger than me. Of course, Becky was just a kid at that time too. Regardless of our respective statuses in relationships, I remember playing well together. Looking back now, I wonder what was going on in my dad's head to make us meet. During elementary school, there were days when I would occasionally meet my dad and Becky, and we would eat together. But as I entered middle school and became busier with club activities and tutoring, naturally the times I saw my dad and Becky became less frequent. I saw my dad decrease. By the time I was in the 8th grade, even the messages from my dad ceased. By then, I knew, without needing the specifics, that my parents had divorced and my dad had a new family. Understanding this fact, I didn't think about contacting him. I can't say that I didn't feel lonely, but I thought that my mom must have been feeling this way even before me. But one day, when I was in the 9th grade, Becky enrolled in our school as a new student. I had no idea where she lived, so I never thought she'd end up at the same middle school. When I saw her, it felt like I was reuniting with an old friend, so I called out to her. "Becky, long time no see." Since elementary school, Becky had always been the girl with soft white hair, big eyes, and long eyelashes. She was the epitome of the kind of beautiful girl that other girls admired, but in middle school she had become even more stunning. Indeed, she was so noticeable among the new students that she became a hot topic in my grade. When I called out to her, Becky stared at me with her large eyes and said, "Who are you?" I could tell it was her right away, but had she forgotten me? Considering how young she was when we used to play together, it was understandable. Given the complicated nature of our relationship, I hesitated to explain. Although I was disappointed that we couldn't have a proper conversation, I opened my mouth, deciding to pretend it was a case of mistaken identity. Then Becky said, "Oh, you're the poor girl who got dumped by my dad." Huh? Even Becky's friends who were with her were taken aback and asked her to repeat. Apparently, my dad was deceived by a terrible woman when he was young. He couldn't bear it, divorced her, and then married my mom. "Do you need something? You're scaring me." With that, Becky started to act afraid of me. What do you mean, terrible woman? Your dad is the terrible one, isn't he?" I couldn't help but retort. But this was just so typical of Becky. No matter how much I tried to explain myself, the atmosphere had entirely shifted in Becky's favor. "You're a scary senior. If you continue to bully Becky, we'll report you to the student guidance counselor." That's what one of Becky's friends told me. No, I didn't mean it like that. Regardless of what I said, I was not believed and ended up being gossiped about in school as the senior who bullied the cute junior out of jealousy. We used to play together so well when we were kids. I couldn't fathom why Becky acted the way she did, and it broke my heart. I was even dumped by my boyfriend, who accused me of bullying a junior, something he said he hadn't expected from me. To add insult to injury, a few months later, he was dating Becky. This happened twice. I understand that in a small middle school community. In the middle school community, it's not unheard of to date the same person. But for it to happen twice, that was beyond mere coincidence. I tried confronting Becky about it, but it only backfired with further accusations of me being a bully. Moreover, these false rumors about me never cleared up until graduation. I finally gave up on trying to understand Becky and chose to attend a high school where no one from my middle school was enrolled. No one knew about the rumors, and there was no Becky, so I wasn't worried about any further gossip. I was at peace with my high school life, but in the spring of my junior year, I was in for the worst surprise. Becky had enrolled in the same high school, and she was also a manager of the soccer club, just like me. As soon as Becky saw me, she said, "Oh, Harper is here too. Nice to see you." This time, she was acting like a sweet junior. This is the same girl who gave me a hard time back in middle school. I just couldn't keep up with her dramatic transformation, and I didn't even feel like building a good relationship as senior and junior. I had no intention of being mean, but I was scared because I had no idea what Becky was planning behind her smiles. My bad hunch proved right. "Harper, why are you so cold to me? Did I do something wrong? I'm upset." Becky accused me of this while crying in front of the whole soccer team. What? I didn't think I had been that harsh, and if anyone had been mean, it was always her towards me. Becky was playing the victim and trying to demean me. She did it again. I thought to myself, but it was too late. All the team members adored Becky, who was cute, cheerful, and considerate. I thought I had established a good relationship of trust as a manager, but in this situation, no matter how much I struggled, I was the bad guy. I ended up being warned by the school administration for bullying my junior, and my position in the soccer team also suffered. I was perfectly labeled as a mean senior who bullied her junior. Back then, I had a crush on the soccer team captain of my grade. I had been quietly nurturing this feeling for over 2 years, and although it may sound presumptuous, I think we had been getting along well, going out on our days off and such. But with this rumor spreading, I was obviously kept at a distance. And when summer vacation ended, he was dating Becky, and I thought it was a nightmare. Why is Becky so against me? I have nothing to say, if all of this is said to be a coincidence. But have I done something to Becky that she has to bother me even at school club activities? If the one who took away my father was resentful, I would understand, but Becky has both parents and should be living happily. No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't understand Becky's thoughts. I ended my high school life in the same school as Becky, but our relationship remained strained. Life in the worst possible way, I decided to study abroad in hopes of escaping Becky's pursuit. Becky didn't follow me that far. Even after finishing my study abroad and living in Japan, Becky didn't show up for a while. After graduating from high school, I didn't know what Becky was doing or where she was. I was trying to forget the nightmares of my student days and the source of them, Becky, and was trying to get married and be happy. I didn't expect to be messed with by Becky again here. Is it a twist of fate, or is Becky planning something again? I don't know, but I definitely don't want to live my life in fear of Becky. I was sure of that. From then on, I took on more work than usual to avoid unnecessary thoughts. Unlike love, the more you work, the more results you get. I was recognized by my boss for my good work, and these successful experiences gradually healed my heart. My mom was right. As long as I don't give up, I can live positively. Just when I thought so, a few months after the breakup with Michael, when I finished my work and arrived at the station to go home, I saw a surprising sight. Becky? I saw Becky standing in front of a sculpture near the station. She seemed to be waiting for someone. I wondered if she might be meeting up with Michael. Regardless, I absolutely could not let myself bump into Becky. Although I don't currently have a boyfriend or anyone I'm fond of, you never know what else she might take from me. Making sure she didn't notice me, I swiftly made my way to the ticket gates. But then I heard a voice exclaim, "Found you. I was looking for you." And the next thing I knew, my arm was firmly grasped. I could see anger in her eyes, but I couldn't understand why I should be the one she's mad at. Rather, I'm the one who should be mad. What do you want? I don't have anything to talk about, I told her, shaking off Becky's hand, but she grabbed my wrist again forcefully and dragged me to the side of the ticket gate. Just how selfish and pushy can this woman be? With a feeling somewhere between shock and exasperation, I quietly followed her. When we finally reached a less crowded spot, Becky angrily spat out, "What's the meaning of all this? You've been deceiving me, haven't you?" "What are you talking about?" I retorted instantly, as I had no clue what she was talking about. "Don't play dumb with me. It's about Michael, obviously. I'm the one who was hurt the most when it comes to Michael. There's no reason for her to yell at me." And then Becky uttered words I couldn't believe. "Michael took $20,000 from me. What are you talking about?" Seeing my genuine surprise, Becky's expression softened. Becky sank to the ground, out of energy. "So, you're saying you didn't know?" "Michael said he needed $20,000 for his sick mom's operation, so I lent him the money. But the day after I gave him the money, I couldn't get in touch with him. His house was empty. I thought you used Michael to get back at me for taking all the men away from you, but is that really not the case?" If what she said is true, did Michael commit marriage fraud? I can't believe the person I was engaged to turned out to be a fraud. The thought of it sends chills down my spine. I really didn't know. Sure, Michael said the same thing to me, but I didn't have that kind of savings, and I said I couldn't ask my mom for it either, so he immediately broke off our engagement. I don't know how you two met, but perhaps when he realized he couldn't get money from me, he switched his target to you. I was surprised at myself for being able to talk about Michael, who I was heartbroken over, as if it was someone else's business. But Becky, of course, wasn't in a place to think about that. "I was irritated when I saw you coming out of a jewelry store, looking happy with the guy. That's why I stole him, to get back at you. But I never thought it would turn out like this." I finally heard Becky's true feelings. As I suspected, she had intentionally stolen my boyfriends, the men I loved, and even my fiancé. I said to Becky, exasperated, "You're beautiful and have a bright, captivating charm. But because you've only wished for my misfortune and acted thoughtlessly, haven't you brought this unnecessary disaster upon yourself? If you hadn't interfered this time, I might have been the one hurt. You've made your own life difficult." Then Becky cut off my words, yelling in anger, "Shut up, don't you dare lecture me. If it weren't for you, Dad would have been all mine." That's what I didn't like. Mom and Dad were always fighting over child support for you. And every time Dad visited you, Mom cried. I hated you. This was the first time I heard Becky's true feelings. I, who was left alone with my mother, did feel the absence of my father from time to time, but I never had to witness their fights or experience any heart-wrenching feelings. Of course, I think my mom felt sad in ways I couldn't see. But I was raised happy as her daughter. On the other hand, Becky, who appeared to have a happy family with both parents, was dealing with struggles unknown to others. That's not to say I think it's okay for her to harass me, not at all. Hearing Becky's true feelings for the first time, a part of me couldn't help but feel sympathy. I've lent out all my savings and even gotten into debt. I quit my job to get married. What am I supposed to do now? Becky lamented. It's her own fault. She got caught up in this marriage fraud while trying to harass me. Honestly, I can't help but think she brought this upon herself, but after hearing what she just said, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I can't help you with money, but I can at least help you find a job, I offered. She probably didn't expect me to throw her a lifeline. She looked at me in surprise. Someone at my company just left their receptionist job. They're looking for a replacement. Of course, I won't forgive you if you try to harass me again. But if you've learned your lesson, I'll help as much as I can. Even I thought I was being too lenient. But we are sisters after all. Seeing Becky so broken and crying, I couldn't just ignore her. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Becky cried, sobbing uncontrollably. She must have been overwhelmed with regret for everything. From then on, Becky really did start working as a receptionist at my company. Even after all that harassment, and despite thinking I never wanted to have anything to do with her again, I can't believe I was stupid enough to invite her to work at the company where I work. As expected, Becky became popular in the company due to her vibrant appearance and innate brightness. But she's finally learned her lesson and doesn't harass me anymore. She looks a little embarrassed whenever I pass by, but she doesn't spread nasty rumors or speak in a fake voice. Honestly, I'm relieved. By the way, it seems that my mom once overheard a suspicious phone call from Michael when we were engaged. But she didn't have any evidence, so she was debating on what to say to me when the engagement was broken off. While the situation isn't what we imagined, in the end, my mom Becky and I are living our lives positively in unexpected ways. Whatever hardships may come in the future, I'll remember my mom's words. No matter what, I'll be happy. I'll be fine. I'll chant in my heart. When do you die? Even if the love has totally gone cold, who can say something like this to his wife who's been told she has 6 months to live? I was beyond anger and shock. I was utterly dumbfounded. What? You're the one with limited time left. What? My name is Julia. I believe aging gracefully is an eternal goal for both men and women. I just turned 60, but I haven't forgotten to stay fashionable as a woman. Not for my husband. When I look in the mirror and see my hair, makeup, and outfit all perfectly put together, it gives me a buzz. At work, people are surprised to learn I'm 60 and it feels like I'm in my 40s. It feels good when they say no way. My marriage has gone stale and I often wonder why I married this man. I'm a hard-working editor at a weekly comic magazine. My husband isn't a big earner, yet he opposes me working. When men work, women should be doing house chores, he says with a straight face. I can only sigh with these words. It's like he time-traveled from the Stone Age. I want to tell him that even in the animal kingdom, it's the female lions that hunt. I find fulfillment in my job, giving advice to young aspiring comic artists with big dreams and working together to create captivating characters and engaging stories. People in their 60s are young these days. The days of 60-year-olds living in retirement are long gone, or so I believe. But my husband thinks differently. How long are you planning to work? You're already 60. You're definitely being treated as a burden and useless at work. I was fuming, but if I get into an argument, my husband never backs down, so I end up being the one who gives in. That's not true. Today's 60-year-olds are performing as well as the younger employees. I won't tolerate you neglecting housework because of your job. My husband, who genuinely believes that housework is a wife's job, cannot be watching the news. He is the worst kind of chauvinist, thinking men should be dominant and women submissive, not to mention he has a weakness for young, attractive women. I graduated from college and landed my current job. I had a dream of becoming a comic book artist until high school, but I gave up because I didn't have the skills. That's why I support those who chase their dreams. I was so engrossed in my work that before I knew it, I turned 40. Relatives approached me with matchmaking proposals and I started dreaming of married life. Marriage is a significant life decision, so you shouldn't rush into it. But fearing I would be single for life if I missed this opportunity, I accepted a matchmaking proposal and had a blind date with my now husband, who was 41 at the time. Back then, my husband acted like a sweet gentleman, hiding his true colors, so I couldn't see through him. As we were both over 40, and I had no intention of quitting my job. We don't have children. My parents are in their 80s, but unlike my husband, they seem to be in tune with the times and never pressure me by saying they want to see grandkids. There are many women who want children but can't have them. My parents understand that questions like, when will we see our grandkids? And when will you have kids? Can be burdensome. Lately, my husband is often on his smartphone and he whispers during calls. I wondered if he might be cheating, but realizing that I'm not even mad probably means that I've fallen out of love with him. One day, my mother-in-law, who lives nearby, came over to our house. Her husband passed away 3 years ago. 3 years ago, she moved away and now lives alone. My mother-in-law is 85 years old, but always so composed. My husband is no match for her, and it's not out of respect, but probably more about wanting her wealth. That old witch is such a penny pincher. She must have around 200 grand saved up. I have no siblings, so I'll inherit it all. Can't she just pass away already? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There are things that are okay to say and things that are not. Gotta play nice, or she might leave all her money to some charity in her will, or something. At that moment, his mother came from the next room. "Sorry for being such a cheapskate," she said. "Mom." My husband's face turned pale and he unfairly lashed out at me with fury. "You idiot, why didn't you tell me she was here? Shut it, keep it down, you're disturbing the neighbors." There was no way to deny the horrible things he'd said. He hung his head in silence. While my husband was taking a shower, my mother-in-law talked to me. "How long have things been rocky between you two? This doesn't seem like a normal slump. It seems quite serious." I smiled wryly and said, "You noticed? Listen, Julia, if you really can't take it anymore, divorce is an option. There's an old saying about the suffering of loathing someone you're stuck with. It's unbearable. There's no need to consider me in any of this." My mother-in-law's kindness touched my heart. She is wise, cultured, and refined, nothing like my husband. I can hardly believe they are related. My husband must be some primitive man who time-traveled here. This year, my husband had his annual physical at work, but something seemed off. At 61, his unhealthy lifestyle might be catching up with him. He often comes home late and drunk. He claims he was out with coworkers at a bar, but I know he's been going to strip clubs. He shouldn't underestimate a housewife's intuition. My husband had a follow-up at the hospital, and one day the doctor called. The doctor said, "Before we talk to him, we'd like to discuss something with the family." It felt like something out of a soap opera, and I had a bad feeling. What the doctor told me at the hospital shocked me. He only has 6 months to live? The news that my husband had only 6 months left hit me like a ton of bricks, and my emotions were all over the place. I was surprised that I didn't feel more shocked, felt a little pity, almost felt relieved, but then felt guilty for feeling that way. Most wives would be devastated, but I found myself putting on an act to look more upset than I really was. Could there be some mistake? I'm afraid not. Please brace yourself. Whether or not to tell him depends on his personality, and since you know your husband best, what do you mean by personality? If he's the type to become despondent and reckless, it might be dangerous to break the news suddenly. If he has a positive attitude and strong will to live, it might be better to tell him. If my husband hears he only has 6 months to live, I can see him becoming reckless. But going to strip clubs just because he has no symptoms and continuing to drink is not a good idea. I returned home with a heavy heart, but I concluded that I must tell him. When my husband came home at night, I spoke. "Honey, we need to talk. What's with the drama? I'm busy, unlike you. I'm busy too. You make yourself busy. If you don't like being busy, quit your job. It's a man's shame to have his wife work. It's as if I don't make enough." I was taken aback by how outdated my husband's mindset was. He doesn't seem to know that in most households, both spouses work nowadays, and stay-at-home wives are less common. I went to the hospital today. The hospital? Please listen calmly. Stop beating around the bush. I told you I'm busy. I blurted out in frustration. The doctor said that the remaining life is 6 months. For a few seconds my husband stared at me with a straight face, then burst into laughter and covered his mouth with his hand. 6 months to live? Yes. Calm down, don't become reckless. Idiot, who do you think would become reckless? Don't get ahead of yourself, or underestimate me. My husband was talking nonsense, probably due to the shock. Well, it's karma. Such a reckless life leads to that result. I was surprised that he was self-aware. So you should stop drinking so much alcohol. Shut up. For a businessman, attending a drinking party is part of the job for good relationships. Only women would think that drinking means playing around. I'm gonna keep going out drinking. You should stop. Come straight home after work. Then my husband grinned from ear to ear. Wait a second. Don't tell me you want to spend more time as a couple because there's only 6 months left. I didn't want that at all, but I had to play the part of the dutiful wife. Of course I want us to spend more time together. Don't be stupid, I don't have that kind of time. Honey, but he cut me off. Alright, end of discussion. Time is money, and it's a waste to spend it with you. I was amazed at how easily he could say something so hurtful. But it might just be a reaction to the shock, so I didn't say anything more. I was worried about how he was taking it and sneaked a peek at him in his study. He was talking to someone on the phone. "Hi, Miley. Well, I wouldn't exactly call it good news, that would probably be bad karma, but my wife was apparently told at the hospital today that she only has 6 months to live." I didn't ask what the diagnosis was, but if they're talking 6 months, it's probably late stage cancer or something. At first, I didn't understand what my husband was saying. It's just 6 months of putting up with this. I have life insurance on my wife, and my mother is 85, so she'll probably kick the bucket soon too. Once my wife is gone, Miley, let's live together. I want to start my life over. I was shocked. My husband misunderstood the situation terribly. But my anger reached its peak when I overheard a conversation with a woman named Miley. I am very unwilling to tell the truth. He can't even make fun of people. I will not allow him to talk like that even to his own mother. I muttered in a voice so chilling that it gave me shivers. Well, go ahead and live the rest of your life with that misunderstanding. Though by a lifetime I mean 6 months. After I told him about the limited time, my husband not only came home late, but often didn't come home at all. He lied about business trips and went on vacations. It's shocking. My husband started dressing flashy, buying expensive watches, and seemed to be partying every day. He was also buying loads of gifts. It's not like my husband is rolling in dough. Is he counting on the life insurance money after my supposed demise? He's lost all decency as a human being. 3 months have passed since the life expectancy news. I asked my husband, who looked pale, "Are you feeling unwell?" "I've been feeling sluggish lately and get tired easily. I get winded just climbing the stairs at the station." "Guess I'm getting old, huh?" I suggested. "You should cut back on the booze." "Buzz off," he replied. "I told you, drinking is part of the job when I'm entertaining clients. If you've got nothing to say but depressing crap, then drop dead already." That really ticked me off, but I purposely didn't argue. Nagging women are the worst. "You and that old woman should just drop dead," he said. Behind my husband, who was spewing abuse, stood his mother. "You talking about me when you say that old witch?" she asked. "Whoa, you startled me." My husband shot me an angry glare, but my mother-in-law asked again, "Are you calling me an old witch?" "No way, I've never called you an old witch, Mom," I replied. "I have this annoying boss at work named Miss Wiz." Miss Wiz." My husband couldn't meet his mother's suspicious gaze and looked down. My husband, who wanted to complain that I purposely didn't tell him that my mother-in-law was here, went off somewhere. 4 months have passed since the life expectancy news. My husband was coughing more, taking more time off work, and, though he used to have high blood pressure, now he has low blood pressure. He's dizzy from low blood pressure and almost fell down the stairs. And still, he goes on his business trips. I'm disgusted. So he chooses to spend his final days with a mistress instead of his wife. However, the fact that he's gallivanting with his mistress while believing his wife only has a few months to live is utterly disheartening. My husband says his hands and feet are cold even on warm days, and he complains of pain everywhere. If you're not feeling well, you should turn down the business trips. Don't tell me how to do my job. The business trips are the only thing I look forward to. They're important assignments only I can handle. Should I call your office and ask your boss to excuse you from the business trips? As expected, my husband's face turned red as he shouted, "Try it and see what happens. I will never forgive you." I had to stifle my laughter. I can only feel pity for my husband who brought this upon himself, but I am torn about whether to tell my mother-in-law the truth. She has been good to me since we were newlyweds. Then an unexpected visitor arrived. A young woman I had never seen before. "May I ask who you are?" "My name is Miley. Nice to meet you." Could it be Miley is my husband's mistress? She had the audacity to come to our house. I was ready to fight. I'll cut to the chase. "Please set Mike free." "Set him free?" I asked, genuinely surprised by this young lady. Even for a woman like me, Miley was strikingly beautiful, petite, with a great figure, and a flawless sense of fashion. I couldn't fathom why a woman as enchanting as her was involved with my husband. My husband isn't rich, so she's not after his money. And it's hard to believe it's true love. So is this some sort of scam? Mike is suffering. I think it's due to stress. Would you consider divorcing him? She asked. I couldn't help but smirk at her audacity, and I retorted, what you're doing is crossing a line, darling. Isn't it terribly inappropriate to approach a man's wife like this? But she wasn't fazed at all. You know, sometimes you meet your soulmate after you're already married. It's foolish to stay bound by marriage in such cases. We only have one life to live. That's when it hit me. I needed to end this conversation before I lost my cool and did something I might regret. So cut her off with a smile. He's been set free from this earthly realm, so no worries. But whether he's in heaven or took a nosedive to hell, I'm not the Grim Reaper, so I wouldn't know. She looked confused for a moment and then laughed heartily. You're hilarious with the Grim Reaper joke. I'm not one bit funny. How old are you, by the way? I'm 29, 29 still in her 20s. It almost made me dizzy. He was seeing a woman more than 30 years younger than himself. I couldn't hide my astonishment. If you don't mind, what do you do for a living? He came to the place where I work. He's very kind, a really good man. So you're genuinely dating with my husband? Absolutely. Mike's strong and skilled. Stop, I interrupted, glaring at her with a smile. Say another word and I might just have to strangle you. She laughed. I'm serious, it's not funny at all, I scolded her. She fell silent for a few seconds, staring at me, then spoke. I have to say, I'm genuinely surprised. You're nothing like I imagined from meeting you today. Did he talk trash about me? Say I'm a witch or something? Miley burst into laughter again. No, he never said anything bad about you. But honestly, I didn't expect you to be such a wonderful person. I'm not desperate enough to feel flattered by a mistress's compliment, but I began to feel that Miley might not be so bad. I was determined not to like her, but with a woman like her being kind, any Neanderthal of a man would fall head over heels. So it's true love, huh? But soon you'll find out if your feelings are real. What? She tilted her head adorably. I don't have any lingering feelings for my two-timing husband, but I felt a tinge of sympathy for this girl. 6 months have passed since the terminal diagnosis. My husband, looking pale, took another day off work while I returned from work full of energy. Seeing me like this, he sneered. When are you gonna kick the bucket, with a chuckle? How could he say that to his wife, who he believes has only 6 months to live? I kept my anger in check, staying calm. Seriously, you and my mother are like cockroaches, just never giving up. Leave me out of it, but you better not badmouth your mother. I snapped. Suddenly my husband flew into a rage, yelling, who do you think you're talking to? Ah, I see you've got nothing to lose. Well then, let me give you a piece of my mind before you croak. Marrying you was the biggest mistake of my life. The final words that should never have been said. My husband finally crossed the line. I felt a pillar of rage rising through me and I blurted out, is that your last will and testament? Last will? Hold on, you didn't write some weird will, did you? Did you write a will? It's been 6 months since the terminal diagnosis. What the heck are you talking about? You're the one with the terminal illness. Have you finally lost it? I was beyond angry and shocked. I was dumbfounded. Huh? The terminal diagnosis is yours. What? My husband's face froze for a moment, then he burst into mocking laughter. You really need to be hospitalized. You're not making any sense. Get to the hospital today. With that, he stormed into his study. The next morning, I found my husband collapsed in the house. I immediately called an ambulance and informed my mother-in-law before heading to the hospital. After the examination and discovering the truth, my husband lost it, yelling at me in front of the doctor and nurse. Why the hell didn't you tell me something this important? I did 6 months ago. Stop lying. You're the one with the terminal illness. Whether he remembered our conversation from 6 months ago or not, he was in shock. I never actually said who got the terminal diagnosis. I see you kept quiet about your mistake. Are you the devil? This is a hospital, please keep your voice down. Shut up, all of you. Are you in cahoots? He was pointing fingers at the doctor and nurse. It was chaos. My husband was in a frenzy. Enough, I won't be admitted to a hospital that sets me up like this. They might assassinate me. You're exaggerating. Shut up. How can I trust any of you? He shook off the nurse trying to restrain him and stormed out of the room. I had no intention of stopping him from the beginning. I apologized to the doctor and nurse for my husband's disrespectful outburst on his behalf and went home. A few days later, a pale-faced husband returned. When he told Miley the truth, she apparently broke up with him. I couldn't help but think of Miley's face and thought, I guess it was intolerable for her after all. It would have been better if she just broke up with him. But Miley was married. It's not uncommon for club hostesses to lie about being single while married. It seems Miley's husband was in prison and recently got out. When Miley's affair came to light and her husband confronted her, she spilled the beans about my husband. Help me. He's threatening to throw me into the sea alive. Even if I said I'd help, how am I supposed to rescue you from such a scary guy? You're so calm, even though your husband's in danger. Who are you to say that? Maybe you should flee the country. I don't have the money. Turns out, he spent all his savings counting on insurance money 6 months later. With his frequent business trips, or rather vacations with Miley, and probably spending all the money, it's not surprising that he ran through a fortune in a short time. Please, can you lend me some money? I don't have any, I said, pushing him away coldly. Can you borrow some from my mother for me? She won't lend me anything, she's such a cheapskate. You could borrow from Miss Wiz. What? Just like in a comic strip, my startled husband glares at me. I've told you time and again to let me know in advance when she is coming over. Are you doing this on purpose? You, on the other hand, were given 6 months to live. Oh, that was half a year ago, so your time is almost up, isn't it? I was taken aback by this callous remark, but my husband was even more dumbfounded by the unbelievable words from his mother. Is that something you would say to your own son? How many times have you said things that no one would say to a real mother? My husband was speechless at this blow. Mike, please apologize sincerely to Julia. We'll talk after that. My husband couldn't swallow his pride until the very end and shouted, "This is my house. Get out. I don't want to see your faces anymore." Julia, let's go. What, Mike? I am disappointed in you. I am cutting ties with you as mother and son. I will live with my daughter. Daughter? My husband doesn't have any siblings. I was shocked, wondering if she had a secret child, but my mother-in-law said, Julia is my daughter. Do you have a problem with that, Mrs. Miller? My husband's eyes widened at these unexpected words. I was on the verge of tears, but somehow held them back. My mother-in-law and husband are blood-related. If my husband and I divorce, my mother-in-law and I would be strangers. But his mother called me her daughter. Ever since we got married, I felt it. She treasured me like her own daughter. Her love was genuine. My husband, now pale, glared at his mother. What the hell are you saying? I'm your biological son and she's just a daughter-in-law. Isn't it obvious who you should value more? Of course, without a second thought, I'd choose my real daughter, Julia. A man who cheats and shows no remorse is not my son. Whether my husband felt the firm resolve in his mother's words or not, he silently walked away like a ghost and went into his study. I quickly packed my things and started living at my mother-in-law's place. Thankfully, I had a job, and like my husband said, my mother-in-law had some savings. With my mother-in-law's advice, I officially divorced and cut ties completely with him. I wonder if he'll be alright, as he brought this on himself. It scares me that I can coldly think about whether some thugs will get him or something else. Instead, I worry if Miley will be okay. I don't know if this was the right thing to do. Marriage is when two strangers live together, so love is what's most important. When love fades, everything crumbles quickly. But I don't think this marriage was a mistake. I met my mother-in-law. We continued to get along like real mother and daughter, and have happy days. My parents were surprised at first, but when I told them about the rough 6 months, they understood. I am happy now. Happiness is not something that is given by others. It is something you have to earn. When men meet their fiancé's parents, they often say, "I swear I will make your daughter happy." But it's not about having a man make you happy. The source of happiness is within oneself. There is infinite potential in my heart. I will live, believing in my own strength. What on earth is this? I stared intently at the video playing on my smartphone. It showed my home, my and my husband's bedroom. I have an app installed on my phone that streams footage from our home's security cameras. And in that footage, there were images of my husband with another woman. Were they embracing? Their proximity was too intimate to be explained away as just friends or acquaintances. Then I heard voices. You sure she doesn't suspect anything? Yeah, I've been doing exactly as you said. It's perfect. She's clueless, completely believes me. I can picture it. They laughed together, then playfully tumbled onto the bed. I was left speechless by what I was seeing. 'Cause that woman was my very own sister. I'm Nancy Hadley. I'm 50 years old. My husband David, who's turning 55 this year, and I have been married for 20 years. We don't have any children, and we've been living together, just the two of us. Because we were both working, we had a relatively comfortable life. But all that changed about 10 years ago. That's when David was diagnosed with early onset dementia. But as time went on, his errors became more significant. He began forgetting business meetings with clients, forgetting how to do his job altogether, making work a challenge. In everyday life, he couldn't remember where he'd placed things, how to dress himself, and his sense of direction became so bad he'd bump into things. There was even a time when he couldn't recognize me. It was heartbreaking to see him deteriorate like that. But I stayed by his side, taking care of him and loving him until the very end. I sought advice from my sister Anne, who runs a care home. We had him tested at a hospital she recommended, and that's when he was diagnosed with early onset dementia. David had to retire from his job, and now we have a caregiver from Anne's facility come to our home twice a week. Nowadays I'm the breadwinner of the family, busy working every day. Nancy, how is David doing? It was the day our regular caregiver, Miss Johnson, came to our home. That day Anne came with her. And you came too? Yes, he is your husband after all, so I am worried too. Ever since we started relying on Anne's facility, she would often stop by before I left for work. She has been caring for David like a brother ever since we got married, because as she often said when we were younger, she always wanted a big brother. She was the one who was most heartbroken when David was diagnosed with dementia. Even though she herself was supposed to be busy with work, the fact that she would check in on us frequently like this was truly appreciated. Thanks to Miss Johnson, I am able to leave David at home with peace of mind while I go out to work. If I didn't have my income, our household finances would fall apart, so I have nothing but gratitude for the two of them. However, they can't come on weekends, so the burden of caregiving falls on my shoulders alone. I am dealing with work on weekdays, taking care of David on weekends, and I hardly have any time for myself. I wasn't really aware of it myself, but I must have been tired. A nurse who was familiar with me at the hospital where I took David for his regular checkup noticed my fatigue. We have known each other for nearly 10 years, so it seems she can tell even the slightest things. Mrs. Hadley, it's inevitable that caring for your husband is hard, but you need some time to rest by yourself. You're right, I understand that. I may be able to ask Anne and Ms. Johnson for help in a pinch, but I can't bear to cause them any more trouble. By the way, a new nurse came to this hospital the other day, who used to work at a specialized dementia hospital in New York. Maybe she can help you out. Look, there she is. When I looked in the direction the nurse was pointing, I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Amy, my best friend from college. Amy seemed surprised to see me too, but we hugged each other and celebrated our reunion. Amy, who was active in the softball club in college, was still a sharp-looking woman with a neat, short haircut. Nancy, you haven't changed at all. Neither have you, Amy. I am so glad to see you. Amy told me that she had waited for her children to grow up, divorced her husband, and returned to her hometown. Just let me know when you are free for a cup of coffee, she suggested, when David came out of the examination room in his wheelchair after finishing his tests. Oh, this is my husband David. I guess it's been ages since our wedding. That's right. It's been a long time. I am Nancy's friend from college. Amy, bending down to match the eye level of David seated in the wheelchair, paused for a moment. Amy? Something wrong? Eh? Oh, sorry, David, we met once at your wedding. Is that so? I'm looking forward to your future care. Thank you in advance. David smiled at her and replied. Amy seemed to be looking at David with a somewhat meaningful expression. Probably noticing my puzzled look, she stood up with a smile. I've taken care of many patients like your husband, so I might be able to give you some advice. I can be of some help, so feel free to ask. Yeah, I'll rely on you for sure. Thanks, Amy. We waved goodbye to each other. After that, there were several occasions when I met Amy, such as when I went to get David's medicine, or when his health deteriorated. Each time Amy would look at me with concern, but I pretended not to notice and brushed it off. A few months after my reunion with Amy, David and I visited the hospital together. Just as David was called in for an examination, I heard Nancy. When I turned towards the voice, there was Amy, looking serious. Amy, is something wrong? Your husband David just went in for his examination. Do you have a moment to spare? Eh? Sure, I guess. Amy guided me to a counseling room. Nancy, how is it taking care of David? Are you worried about me? Thanks. I discussed David's recent health condition, and also mentioned how the lack of breaks was taking a toll on my body. Amy listened intently to my story. I thought she was just concerned about my well-being, but then she began with, "Actually, Nancy." The following words she spoke were hard to believe. It was about a week before I met you again, Amy started. She was walking around town shopping when she spotted Anne with a man. She was familiar with Anne's face, as she's my sister, but Amy felt like she recognized the man's face. When Amy called out to them and introduced the man as her boyfriend, it was when we met at the hospital again that I realized it was David, your husband. It all seems so confusing. That's surprising. No wonder you had a strange look on your face back then. But Amy had seen Anne and David together in town a week before we met again. However, David seemed entirely unaware of Amy's presence. I was different back then. I had longer hair, down to my shoulders, and I was wearing glasses. I looked totally different. That might explain why he didn't recognize her. But still, there's one more thing that's been bothering me. According to Amy, David's responses at the hospital felt terribly unnatural for someone with dementia. She said that his behavior was exactly like someone she'd seen in the hospital where she used to work, who was pretending to have dementia. The man I saw in town was walking confidently, responding clearly. He looked perfectly healthy. Could it have been a mistake? Perhaps you misidentified him? I don't think so. You know, David has those distinctive moles under his right eye, right? The man with Anne had them too. It's kind of a sexy feature. Look for a guy. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be talking about your husband that way. Amy apologized, seemingly realizing that her comment was a bit inappropriate. But it's true. David does have those moles. It's not common to find someone else with the same face and mole positioning. So, could it be that David has been pretending to have dementia for 10 years and he's having an affair with Anne? The story was hard to believe, but Amy was not one to lie. Honestly, I don't think this hospital is very good, Amy confessed. The doctors here aren't great, and I've heard bad rumors too. Doesn't it seem odd that they have so many patients? So I think you should get a proper check to see if David really has dementia, Amy said with a serious look on her face. Struck by Amy's words, I went to a big box store and bought a home security camera. I placed it in inconspicuous spots in the living room and bedroom to secretly record what was happening while I was at work. I set it up to watch on my smartphone and checked in during breaks. Sure enough, David's behavior was different from what he showed me. He was not lost or confused about where things were placed. He was living quite normally. Moreover, when Miss Johnson, who I had asked to take care of David, arrived, there was no sign of her caring for him. Furthermore, I found out that Anne had been frequently visiting my house while I was away. On top of that, their conversations were clearly recorded on the footage. You're not getting caught pretending to have dementia, right, David? I asked. Yeah, because I'm doing just as Anne suggests. Pretending not to know the date or where things are is working perfectly. Pretending not to write or go outside thinking it's day when it's actually night would be good too. Nancy is a trusting person, so I don't think she'll suspect anything. Is Miss Johnson okay? Won't she spill the beans? She's fine. She's a single mom with a kid, so she needs money. I've been giving her a little higher salary, and she's been keeping quiet. After laughing together, they would flirt and head to the bedroom. I was left speechless when I saw the footage. I couldn't believe my sister and husband were conspiring behind my back, but the evidence was clearly left on the footage. I was lost, faced with the undeniable truth. A few days later, I felt the urge to talk to Miss Johnson, who had been taking care of David. When I contacted Miss Johnson, she said she would be available the following Saturday. I visited her apartment and showed her the footage. She looked resigned, apologized to me with tears in her eyes, saying, what's in this footage is the truth. I've been deceiving you all this time and I'm truly sorry. I don't have a license and I was struggling to find another job. I had no choice but to go along with what Anne said because she hired me with such attractive terms. As Anne had said in the footage, she was a single mother raising her child on her own. And she needed money. However, she felt guilty because she knew she was aiding and deceiving someone. Thanks to that guilt, I was able to get her testimony. She also entrusted me with copies of receipts, daily reports, and her diary from that time. No matter how much I needed money, I did something unacceptable as a human being. I am really sorry. She kept apologizing over and over again. In addition to the evidence and testimony provided by Ms. Johnson, I decided to collect more proof. After visiting a few related parties and hearing their stories, I consulted with my lawyer and decided to confront David and Anne at the scene of their affair. On a typical weekday, I pretended to go to work as usual and waited near my house. When Anne arrived at the house, it seemed like the right time when the two of them likely got busy. I came back home. Capturing the scene, they panicked, unable to escape, and I said coldly, "I know everything now, David. I heard you messed up your precious job, got sidelined, and started to hate your work." This was something his coworker had told me. David had been saying to his colleagues, "There's nothing more I can do here. Nancy is making good money. I want to quit and live a laid-back life." Looking at my calm demeanor, David began to confess in a hurry. "It wasn't for me, it was Anne who seduced me. She said we could pretend to have dementia and be supported by you. While you are at work, we can meet as much as we want." Even Miss Johnson was hired by Anne for the sake of an alibi. His words suggested that the one at fault is Anne, not me. At David's words, Anne went hysterical and began to rage. What the heck? Even David was fully on board with the plan. And now he's trying to duck out and avoid responsibility. That's cowardly. Shut up. You were the one who kept pushing me into this. I just went along with what you said. I could feel my heart growing colder as the two of them bickered at each other, stark naked. "That's enough. Both of you get out." I threw them out of the living room window, along with their clothes and Anne's purse that were scattered on the floor, and then shut the window. They kept banging on the window, saying things like, "Open up," and "Let us explain." But I just closed the curtains and ignored them. When they wouldn't stop banging on the window, I sent them a message on WhatsApp saying, "Be quiet. If you don't want the cops called, leave now." And suddenly they fell silent. For a few days afterward, they kept coming to the house and sending messages on WhatsApp, which got on my nerves. So I sold the house and moved to a weekly rental apartment. In fact, when David was diagnosed with dementia, I had changed the title of our jointly owned house to my name. David, who had retired, no longer had the ability to pay the mortgage, and I changed the title in advance, thinking it would be a hassle if a dementia patient had decision-making authority in case of an emergency. I was able to sell the house for more than I expected, and I purchased an apartment with the money I had. The money I had quietly saved up. I hadn't foreseen a situation like this, but I must say, good job past Nancy. And so I divorced David. I also claimed division of assets against David. It doesn't matter whether David has the ability to pay or not. It's a statement that you two did this to me. I'll never forgive or forget it. What follows is what I heard through the grapevine. After divorcing me, David remarried and now lives in her house. However, it seems that they are not doing very well. This is just my assumption, but I think David and Anne were just caught up in the excitement of their affair. Once they get married, they can no longer just be lovers. Living together, for better or worse, things will come to light. And they will need to accept each other, recognize each other, and sometimes turn a blind eye. But it must be difficult for those two who remarried in the aftermath of the affair. And even if they were to discuss breaking up, both of their parents have already passed away. The house where David and I used to live had already been sold. David doesn't have a place to return to now. They don't have any other family to rely on, no place to escape, so they have to deal with everything by themselves. Well, I couldn't care less. Actually, I would say they got what they deserved. Due to Ms. Johnson's revelation, Anne's facility had its license revoked and was closed. It seems that the facility was not making enough profit to repay the amount of money they had borrowed from the bank when they opened. So now it has a significant amount of debt. That seems like a sufficient price for a sister who stole her sister's husband. It seems the quack doctor who issued the fake diagnosis faced trouble too. Following the incident, his staff, including Amy, quit one after the other, making it impossible to keep the business running, leading to the closure of his clinic. Apparently, he had been accepting requests from some unsavory sources, issuing false medical reports like he did for David, and in return, they would refer patients to him. This was the truth behind why he had so many patients despite lacking the skill and any good reputation. After learning the truth, I was shocked by how outrageous some doctors can be. But I had to admit my fault too. I was too trusting. I took my sister's word and the quack doctor's claims at face value. According to Amy, I am too kind and I trust people too much. I don't like to doubt people, but these days I am reflecting and realizing that I need to scrutinize what people tell me more and think for myself. By the way, Amy seems to have found a new job at a large general hospital in the neighboring town. Her work experience in a New York hospital was highly regarded, and it seems she has already earned the trust of those around her and is enjoying her work. And on Amy's recommendation, Miss Johnson also started working at the hospital cafeteria. Wow, adorable! Amy's eyes were sparkling at the sight of a puppy frolicking with a ball. This puppy is a male miniature Dachshund that I brought. I brought home a Dachshund about a month ago. He's my precious partner, soothing my heart and body when I come home tired from a long day at work. Since this little guy arrived, Amy has started to visit my apartment more often. He's just so cute, I can't resist seeing him. She says that, but in reality she's coming because she's worried about me. She won't admit it though. I've lost my husband, but now I get to spend this enjoyable time with my best friend. I find myself thinking that a single life enjoying the company of a female companion doesn't sound too bad after all.